Hi, hello, and welcome. My name is Sarah Hassan. I'm a writer, trainer, moderator, and part of the GenderSAFE project. It's a great pleasure to have you all here today and have this great talk, this webinar on technology-facilitated abuse in academia by Arpita Chakraborty, who will be in conversation with Ayşe Gül Altinay. This webinar is organized within the EU-funded GenderSAFE project that promotes zero tolerance for gender-based violence in the European research area and supports research and higher education institutions in establishing safe, inclusive, and respectful environments by setting up comprehensive policies. Before we dive into today's input, let me introduce today's program to you and give you a couple of notes. In today's session, we're going to talk about the issue of technology-facilitated gender-based violence and its presence and prevalence in academia. We will hear about the main conceptual frameworks and the priorities aimed at addressing this issue in academia. We'll get concrete advice and suggestions based on practices that are already implemented in institutions across the EU. The first part of this webinar will therefore be a presentation of findings where we will learn about Arpita Chakraborty's work and experience, where we will dive into the framework of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And following that input, we will have a 30-minute conversation between Arpita Chakraborty and Ayşe Gül Altinay. Following that conversation, we will have the opportunity for an about 30-minute Q&A. Please already feel free to post your questions in the chat during the conversation, and we will be happy to ask them later on. One last note on housekeeping rules, something that's always worked very well in this community and in the community of practice that we've been building is that this is a respectful space. It's for exchange, it's for mutual learning, where people value each other's contributions, where they give space, and where we all want to be very aware of the fact that victim survivors can always be in this space. And therefore, we want to pay particular attention to that. That also means that disrespectful questions will not be platformed if people are not following our rules of engagement. For this collective learning space that we're building here, we will have to ask them to take a step back. And if anyone should repeatedly ignore these rules, we will unfortunately have to remove them. I do not think that this will be the case. It's never been the case, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about this and in this together. And now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our great panelists. Arpita Chakraborty, who has been so generous to join us today, is the Vice Director of the Institute for Research, Gender and Sexualities at Dublin City University. She's specifically interested in looking at how ideas around gender, masculinities, and caste migrate transnationally and how it affects migrant women of color in Europe. She collaborates with civil society partners outside of academia, co-produces knowledge, and communicates research findings for societal impacts. Her work has been published in leading international peer-reviewed publications, including Critical Studies on Security, International Feminist Journal of Politics, Economic and Political Weekly, and Religion and Gender. She's created and taught various modules on post-colonial politics, gender studies, and masculinity studies. And in her former role as an editor, she oversaw the production of 13 top-rated academic journals from Sage Publications. Very impressive. Hi and welcome, Arpita. And our second speaker today is Ayşe Gül Altinay, who has 30 years of experience in research, teaching, and activism, and has recently retired as professor of anthropology and gender studies from Sabancı University, where she served as a co-creator of the sexual harassment policy and the gender equality action plan, was also the co-founder and director of the Gender and Women's Studies Center of Excellence, She published widely and extensively on gender-based violence, militarism, genocide, and gendered memories of war and political violence. And recently, Ayşe Gül's work has focused on transformative activism and feminist and queer reimaginings of life and ecology. Currently, Ayşe Gül serves as the chair of Earth Sky Solidarity Association in Istanbul. And through her teaching, research, and activism, Ayşe Gül is passionate about co-creating spaces that weave personal, collective, and planetary journeys of reckoning, healing, and transformation. Welcome, Ayşe Gül. And with that, I would like to pass the floor on to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this beautiful introduction. It's really an honor and privilege to be a part of the Gender Safe journey and to be here today with Arpita Chakraborty, from whom I've learned a lot in the small amount of time that we've spent together in different contexts in the past year. I really think that the Gender Safe project, with the space that it's creating for all of us to know that we're not alone as we tackle the very challenging cases of gender-based violence in all of our lives and in our institutions, and for really creating this space for remembering and recognizing that there's tremendous feminist knowledge and wisdom that is here within each one of us and in our collective to address these cases. In Turkey recently, there's a new wave of Me Too for movement. And the first thing that people start asking is, how can we institutionalize mechanisms that make this, that can prevent, and that can really transform this culture of violence that shapes all of our different contexts. So Arpita is someone who really carries that feminist wisdom, both within academia and beyond, from India to Ireland and beyond. And I think we're very lucky to have her here with us today. And I'm extremely honored to be the discussant of this conversation, to be in this conversation with her. So Arpita, on to you.
Thank you so Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks to GenderSafe for organizing this. It is a topic which is very dear to my heart, which I have been working on in the past year. And before I start talking, I just wanted to, I see many of my Irish colleagues here as well, and I thought it would be prudent to just mention that I devised this talk as an introductory conversation and training, mostly for university staff and people working in the university who are working towards creating a safe space within their universities. So this is not a very intensive academic talk, and I would love for you to come and ask your questions from your own context, because of course every university and every country has a different context and our challenges are very different. So I'm going to talk for the next 15 or 20 minutes, perhaps, or maybe a bit more. And then I welcome you to bring in your questions, your contexts, and we can share and discuss together. And I hope to learn as much from you all and your contexts as I bring into this conversation. I'm going to start by sharing my um, presentation here. Please let me know if you can all see. Yeah, okay. So, introduction to technology facilitated abuse in academia. As someone who has been in the academic space for almost all my life, living and studying and now working, researching, we all have use technology in all various forms. So it seems kind of all pervasive when we start talking about technology. So what we will do today is start by clarifying what exactly it is that we mean by technology facilitated abuse, the types of technology that are used for these forms of abuse, and what kind of vulnerable group, what kind of support vulnerable groups need while they're experiencing TFA, what safe and secure technology means in the university context, specifically when it comes to the use of social media, when it comes to uh, safety planning in terms of the use of technology, because it is clear, I think, that no technology is not the route that we can go down. So safety planning is one of the essential features that we are going to talk about today. The kind of institutional mechanisms that we can set up against TFA, and I will end by giving you some examples of good practice. We will also share towards the after the end of the presentation some resources that you might find useful in creating your own institutional mechanism. So before I go into speaking about the technology aspect of it, I wanted to briefly remind all of us, as we are starting to talk about this, about what abuse actually means to all of us. Because I think setting down that context of abuse is important in understanding technology facilitated abuse. As we see, this is the wheel of abuse that had been popularized for the past several decades and had been used extensively in our understanding of domestic violence and interpersonal violence. Abuse is about power and control, and it's a form of control through intimidation, through isolation, isolating the survivors, and it takes various forms. It can take the form of using coercion and threats. It can take the form of emotional abuse, that is, preventing someone from taking a job, preventing someone from accessing their economic resources, hindering their financial responsibilities, uh, using minimizing, denying, or blaming. That is, we have recently more and more frequently used the term gaslighting, and using isolation. Now, isolation is a very key, important aspect of technology facilitated abuse as well. So we need to remember this, especially when we talk about TFA. Uh, and keeping now this wheel of power and control in mind, we now go to talk about technology facilitated abuse. It has different names. Some people will call it technology facilitated gender violence, which brings in the more gendered aspect of it. Technology facilitated coercive control, where we talk about how this form of control and abuse is very difficult to pinpoint in, because it's not a physical form of abuse, and there are frameworks of against physical abuse or psychological abuse, but technology facilitated coercive control has been found to be very hard to determine within the present current context and legal framework that we have, as well as technology facilitated sexual violence. Um, Now, when we talk about technology facilitated abuse and sexual violence, what are the impacts? What are the impacts of these forms of abuse? Um, we can go into statistics. We can talk about we can talk about how it severely impacts every form of uh, living. But the best way to describe to you the urgency of technology facilitated abuse is that um, till now, interpersonal forms of violence were seen as forms of violence where survivors were moved away from the context. So we see, for example, domestic violence refuges, right, where the domestic violence survivors are taken out of the context of the home where the abuse is happening, and they're taken to a refuge. The crisis with technology facilitated abuse is that the perpetrator seems to be omnipresent. They seem to be everywhere. Survivors find it very hard to escape that form of abuse. So I'm going to play to you now spoken word poetry by poet Rakaya Fetuga, where she actually talks about technology facilitated violence and its impact, how it feels for survivors.
Ever had your phone shoot lightning? An attack with no sound, When someone comes for you online, your image tapped, shared, and multiplied, it's public. But only you feel it speared through your thoughts until your body isn't yours, until you can't work the same, can't concentrate, can't clean shame off the smiles you wear, pretending none of it struck you. And from a cyberstorm, you ask for help to delete the comments and take the pictures down, but you're met with slow systems and silence. If you turned your trauma into a song for copyright, it would have more protection than a woman online. Can't we do better than these shoddy rights? Give our image and our bodies rights. Real repercussions when lightning strikes. Abuse won't end on its own. We have to fight.
So you see, the all-pervasive nature of technology-facilitated abuse is very concerning because your perpetrator can reach you no matter where you are. They can reach you at any time of the day. And these forms of violence, what is it that makes technology-facilitated abuse a form of abuse technology-facilitated? Now, the use of mobile or digital technologies can be used to harass, abuse, threaten, monitor and stalk, impersonate, and humiliate another person. And this can also take the form of abuse where in-person abuse, that is abuse in real life, is being facilitated by and promoted with the use of technology as well. Now, many of us have this understanding that TFA is only types of abuse that happen online. Say, for example, sharing of intimate pictures, or, for example, violent comments or stalking, online stalking. But actually, technology facilitated abuse also includes those forms of abuse where it can facilitate offline abuse, where technology is used to facilitate offline abuse. So, a good example of that would be where uh, a location app is used to stalk and track down a survivor. Now, that is a form of abuse that is happening in real life, but it is using technology, and we include that under technology facilitated abuse as well. So, what it makes clear abundantly at this point is that we cannot um, even think about countering and countering abuse, forms of abuse, and protecting survivors if we don't include the role of technology in it. So when it comes to talking about university spaces and creating universities, making universities a safe space for everyone, the role of technology and how technology is impacting our university staff, our university students, becomes very much integral and crucial in the whole framework that we are creating. Now, I thought, like, before going ahead, I will give you some examples of technology-based abuse, like cyber stalking, isolation, GPS tracking, unauthorized access to mails, emails, and many universities, especially in Europe, would have their own student portals. So unauthorized access to portals or unauthorized access to assignments can be a form of abuse as well. Online harassments, online shaming, doxing, and these forms of, like, also denial of access to resources, hindering access to resources for a survivor can also be a very crucial form of abuse when it comes to university students. Now we come back to again the wheel that I started off with, and we see how technological abuse plays a role in that wheel of power and control. And what we see is that technology is integrated in the way people are monitored and stalked, people are isolated. So technology-based abuse and real-life abuse cannot be separated anymore. These are very integrally connected. So any university space, any framework that is created in order to prevent sexual violence, in order to prevent gender-based violence, need to take into account what role technology is playing. Now, technology is not a uniform term. Access to technology is different in term depending on where in the world you are, depending on what generation you come from, depending on the kind of information and education levels that we have, and hence use of technology for abuse changes accordingly, which then brings us to the point that if in order for us to create a universal framework that would help us in creating a successful framework against tech abuse, we need to understand within our own context how that technology is being used. So, say for example, what can be the signs in your own context that someone might be experiencing technology-based facilitated abuse? Say someone can be seen to be repeatedly receiving constant messages, phone calls, or perpetrators are controlling technology devices or accounts of a survivor. Now, these are very visible and very direct ways of control. But there can also be more subtle signs like perpetrators showing up to locations where a person is, can mean that they are being geo-tracked using location apps, or online banking passwords have been shared with family members, and family members have access to online banking. When there are shared smart home devices, shared Spotify accounts by students, which is a very common practice, shared Netflix accounts, these can be used in order to, these passwords can be, this can become a way to hack passwords. And education about what are the ways in which people can be made vulnerable to these forms of abuse is very limited currently. And that is the place where I feel universities can play a very crucial role to not only promote that form of education within students and staff, but also through students and staffs to their own family members. So, what would that look like? So, a technology based equality model where framework for a safe space where people can learn and educate using technology in a safe way needs to have a certain prerogatives. Now, these will look very different based on which country you are in, what are the legal frameworks available to you, and what are the kind of technologies that are used within your own university campus. However, these are some of the basic premises that I came up with that can be a good starting point. Not only to prevent, but to create safe, healthy relationship with technology, which means that there are not only preventative measures, but there is active educational program where people are taught healthy digital habits, how to create safe passwords, how to continue making safe passwords, how to make sure that technology people feel safe to report technology facilitated abuse. What are the reporting chains present within a university? So, the role of technology in relationships within the university. For example, is there a clear model of where someone who's facing technology facilitated abuse should go to report it? What kind of support systems are present in within your university if that happens? Is there a technology champion within students or within staff who is primed up to deal with issues related to this? Because sometimes these can be related to other forms of abuse, but sometimes these are such unique forms that people need to be more acquainted to technology-based abuse situations, legal frameworks, and the technologies themselves in order to answer queries related to that. Do you have a person within your university who can do that? Now, these are questions. When we come to answering these questions, we will realize that most university spaces currently deal technology-based abuse within the larger framework of gender-based abuse. But clearly, there are very different needs that need to be, there are different, very different needs to be catered if we are to deal with technology-based abuse in a successful manner. Now, we also see that most technology-based abuse when universities deal with these kinds of discussions, they are mostly catered towards students. And this comes with the false impression that students are the ones, they are the TikTok generation, they are the ones using various forms of technology, they are the ones more exposed to various forms of abuse. But increasingly, we are realizing that's not true. The use of technology varies. So, for example, teaching staff will probably use more different forms of technology. They will use more of, say, for example, financial resources. They will use intra-university resources for teaching more than students. But that makes the risk factors different, not less or more. And that recognition is also currently absent in many university frameworks. So that is something that we need to work on. I added here two examples of websites where you see very good resources and very good examples of how TFA has been dealt with in various contexts. Stop Violencia de Género Digital is a Spanish resource. Trollbusters is an English resource. But from both of these are very useful. We will also share some more resources with you after this webinar. Now, coming to institutional responsibility, then, what can you do? Or what can we do as universities? I have used this figure that is brought by Rodriguez and Heras Gonzalez, and they created this in terms of what university ICT strategy against gender-based violence should be. So this, while they were not directly talking about TFA, the framework that they created is very useful when we do talk about TFA. So they talk about creating a dedicated professional ICT support to deal with TFA. ICT communication funnels, which will be dedicated again to talking about the forms of communication that TFA can be used for. Create dedicated programs against gender digital gap. So there is a digital gap in European universities, interestingly, in how in terms of how different genders use technology. So while I was more looking at the generational gap of use of technology, there is also a gender digital gap. And these gaps need to be understood while creating frameworks. Video streaming channels and educational smartphone apps to be used for and used dedicatedly all throughout the year in order to create an environment of awareness and an environment of safety within the campus, and using the social networks to get across to people the need to educate themselves. So, for example, every induction program that for new staff and new students, and by staff, I not only mean academic staff, but also non-academic staff, should include a dedicated resource for technology facilitated abuse. Training programs to mitigate cyber harassment. HarassMap. Now, HarassMap is, you can look it up. HarassMap is something that was created in Egypt. Let me see if I can bring it up quickly for you. Sorry. This is Trollbusters that we talked about. Okay, HarassMap. Can everyone see what I'm sharing?
No, we can't, Arpita.
Okay.
We're still seeing your presentation.
It's okay. I will share the link with everyone. There you go.
Great.
Yeah. So this is HarassMap. This was created in Egypt to create a map of harassment, of how harassments were happening and how where it was happening and how it was being dealt with. Now, creating such maps for within the university in terms of not only the real life university space, but also the digital space, to see which are the digital areas, which are the, say, for example, which social media is university staff and students are facing most forms of TFA. Creating these kinds of maps will, in due time, create a broader understanding of how TFA is being experienced in your own particular context. Speak Out, again, a resource which was formed in Ireland with aim to help survivors in situations of violence in university environment, has been found to be phenomenally helpful and successful, and I will share this again later. Twofold apps have been created, offering a service of mobile phone assistance for survivors and ensuring a rapid response to their needs 24 hours a day. This is something that has been rolled out in my own university, and found this is accessible as and when needed, specifically when survivors come forward with forms of abuse, and within the first moments and few days or weeks when they need dedicated care, and using specific institutional smartphone applications to integrate awareness and consciousness raising. Um, Many of our universities do already have cyber awareness campaigns, right? Cybersecurity modules that we have to compulsorily go through. Now, technology facilitated abuse can be made a part of those modules, and can be an easy way to create awareness. These are all, again, suggestions that I have put down for those of you who are working towards creating a university framework for against technology facilitated abuse. Creating a repository of technical legal advice ready for cases of cyber harassment and digital violence, expert examination of IT equipment. So this becomes very crucial when it comes to the dedicated IT team within the university. And a suggestion that has come up again and again is that within the IT team, there should be specific people intensively trained to deal with cases of TFA. So there should be sensitivity training in how they approach and talk to survivors when survivors first contact them, because IT teams are often the first point of contact in cases of TFA. Recuperation and preservation of digital evidence. Creating and keeping those information, keeping information and storing. There is a dedicated format of how these information should be stored and records kept for not only legal purposes, but also for all future cases in order to protect survivors. Protection from email privacy infringement, analysis of email and WhatsApp authenticity. So these are, again, easier said than done, but dedicated IT teams are often taking proactive measures to make sure that it is harder and harder to, infringe email privacies. And analysis of unauthorized use of IT equipment by third parties, which is often creating issues in terms of how, uh, in terms of keeping security of staff and students intact within universities. Now, this is a technology abuse basics checklist. This checklist is taken from Australia. Australia has been one of the primary drivers and the first one of the first countries to dedicatedly promote research on technology-based abuse, which is why some of the resources, most important and crucial resources, are coming out from there. Now, this basics checklist is a very good resource to give to students as part of their induction, to give to staff as a non-academic staff as well as part of their induction, where it talks about how to keep devices safe, how to use apps and social medias in a safe way, subscriptions and what the kind of security issues and exposure that subscriptions can often create for us, and how information can be stored in a safe manner. So this is something that the universities can always add to the induction packages in order to make sure that from the very beginning of their access to the university space, people are becoming aware of the way they use technology and the kind of information they put out about themselves in the university. Um, Government in putting information about government and service providers, putting information out about people to be contacted within the university, dedicated people to be contacted within the university if there are cases of technology based abuse, and how survivors can do that in a safe manner to ensure privacy of survivors if they decide to come forward, and always creating mm, there are more and more increasingly, because of resource crunches, it is impossible to provide students, for example, dedicated computers. So often there are universities where students are sharing computers. Creating strict rules and regulations about how sharing hardware without exposing themselves or others to technology-based abuse is again paramount. So before we end, my final tips and takeaways would be to create a similar resource in from taking into account the needs and specificities of your students and your staff, keeping in mind the legal framework under which you work, always including institutional details, creating a clear framework of who are the people at the departmental level, at the university level to be contacted in cases of technology based abuse, treating technology based abuse as seriously as sexual violence, gender based violence, and understanding that these are often not separate but integral and interact and reinforce each other. Making local resources available to students, local resources in terms of organizations to go to in case survivors do not want to contact people within the university. So in my university, for example, if you go to the toilets, the toilet doors always have resources of local organizations plastered. So if if students want to contact them, that's a way that they can always see that it's happening. Making these not hidden resources, but making it visible across campus, across the universities, across the forums, the dedicated apps that students use to access their resources, and always sharing with new students and staff. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hope to hear from you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Arpita. I think you've already given us a lot to think and reflect on. So maybe I can start with this question. Within one of the main focus points is intersectionality. There's a community of practice organized around intersectionality. And of course, you yourself have done a lot of work on intersectionality, looking into its impact in migration, in gender-based violence. So can you say more on the intersectional challenges and how universities can tackle them as they develop policies and mechanisms against technology-facilitated abuse?
I think I will tie in here intersectionality with the drive towards internationalization that has taken over most of our universities recently. So we see the need of universities for different reasons, for budgeting, funding. We see this drive towards internationalization, and in many ways, rightly so. But the issue with internationalization is also that we really underestimate how vastly different the needs of international staff and students are, how technologically, the way they use technology are sometimes very different, the way they're exposed to technology facilitated abuse is very different. So I will give you one example. Um, I and this is actually a real life example of someone that I knew. So a PhD student from India, living in Ireland, leaving all her friends and families and coming to Ireland to an Irish university, right? What she faces is not only changes in terms of culture, in terms of language, but also like she has completely left everyone she knows. What happens is that in such cases, internationalized students like the person I'm talking about become extremely reliant on technology to keep intact their social life, to keep intact their many of their professional lives and contacts. This makes them ever more dependent on technology on the one hand. On the other hand, like in the case of this person, her partner would want her to keep her location app constantly live to show where she's going. Why does she report a form of abuse like that? It's not that she does not recognize this as a form of abuse, but that the university doesn't presently have, most universities would presently have no recognition of needs of, say, for example, transnational digital abuse or transnational forms of abuse that often take digital forms. And there is no clear directions as in where they should go, what form of as a university, what form of support can we give a survivor like that. And these are things that we haven't even started thinking about. So when it comes to intersectionality, I feel when we use the term intersectionality, very often we are thinking about that we are talking about the minoritized and racialized population. Yes, we are. But these are not essentially minorities in our universities anymore. This is a big chunk of our staff and students and their needs that remain unmet and who remain exposed to forms of abuse that we have not even started talking about yet.
And of course, the related challenge always is, and we've been discussing this in GenderSAFE a lot, international students can be even more vulnerable when it comes to reporting. They may fear that they may have certain concerns about their visa status and all kinds of other issues as they choose or to report or not to report.
Exactly. And the kind of, I think, to report or not to report is of the onus is on the university to create a safe enough environment and a safe enough space so that even though we do not have the answers, people feel safe to raise these questions.
Mm-hmm. Right. And maybe building on that, I can ask you to share with us your own experience with creating some of these mechanisms. I know that in India also you were engaged in your university creating a gender-based violence mechanism, and you continue to do this kind of work now here in Ireland. What advice could you give to those of us in the gender safe communities of practice and beyond? I know there are other people watching this webinar. As we design, co-create, or refine our university policies so that they can better respond to technology facilitated abuse. You've already given wonderful links as to what to do and what to include, but how about the modalities of working together? Do you have other advice as to how we can facilitate the process of addressing this new form of violence?
I am so, so tired of universities working on gender-based violence and sexual violence and excluding non-teaching staff. We have, most universities will not have non-teaching staff representatives in these kinds of committees. And these are the people who are most exposed to these forms of abuse. These are the people who are the most vulnerable. They are often come from minoritized communities, migrant communities. They do not have any form of mechanisms to report these forms of abuse. So EDI is all good. Working on gender-based violence and creating frameworks are all good. But are we trying to make real change? Because if you are, the first question that we probably need to ask ourselves is, what is our university doing for those cleaning staffs who work after hours at night alone, where they're completely exposed? What kind of safety mechanisms do we have in place for them? Are they feeling safe? Has anyone even asked them if they are feeling safe? Do we have reporting mechanisms? Do we have any kind of statistics on how frequent abusive experiences are for these people? And safety, like top down gender violence frameworks, top-down technology facilitated abuse frameworks will never work if we don't include uh, our most vulnerable people in the very mechanisms where we are actually creating the resources, creating the laws and regulations. So if you take one thing from this webinar, please look up in your own university and see whether what kind of frameworks of support and safety is available for your non-teaching vulnerable staff.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. And of course, this is a very important aspect of intersectionality that sometimes gets excluded or forgotten, let's say. Certainly in GenderSAFE, this is the focus. And I know everyone is trying to be as inclusive as possible of the different constituents of the university, including the non-teaching staff. I wonder if you have other suggestions or advice that particularly relate to intersectionality. What are some steps, strategies that we can use to make sure that we expand our intersectionality lens as we work on these mechanisms and policies?
One of the very good examples that comes to mind is around 2013, we were working on creating the sexual violence prevention committees across Indian universities. In 2012, there was a very famous, very infamous rape case in New Delhi, following which there was a national protest that went on for months. And I was in India at that time, and I was part of the protest, part of women's organizations who were working on that. What led was changes in the national laws, but also changes in how universities created committees. These were called CASH committee, Committee Against Sexual Harassment. And there were detailed national legal frameworks put down on how CASH committees have to be instituted within each university. And one part of that was that CASH committees have to have representatives from all staff and student or parts of all students and staff. So not only uh, academic staff, but also non-academic staff, not only permanent staff, but also non-permanent temporary contractual staff, right? Another thing that came up uh, that unfortunately was not implemented as well in all universities, of course, but was really well implemented in one university called Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, which was that if a case came to the CASH committee, the Committee Against Sexual Harassment, if which was say from a person of minoritized community, and if they wanted, they could have with them a representative from that community present in the CASH committee to ensure that there wasn't any. So in terms of, in the Indian context, this was in relation to caste. So say if someone from a Dalit community was a survivor and they see that no one in the CASH community comes from a Dalit minority background, they can request for a Dalit representative to be present in the CASH committee in order to ensure that that perspective is brought into account while dealing with this particular case. And I found that, again, it is not only about putting in the laws, but implementing as well. Of course, that's always there. But I found that as a very good way of dealing with the, crucial questions of intersectionality that we often come up with. That how can we talk about technology facilitated abuse that, say, for example, an Indian survivor is facing from an Indian perpetrator who's back in India, when the committee here does not even include someone from India who does not even understand all the complexities of caste and class and, linguistic backgrounds. So a good way, while limited, would be to make sure like there is someone present in the committee who understands those nuances.
So would this be someone from the university community present, or a representative of an NGO, let's say, that works on that community, with that community? Would that be included as well?
I mean, the cash committees in India were framed in a way that all committee members were part of the university space. So this member would ideally also be part of the university. But then it was up to the survivor whether they were happy with the proceedings of the university, within the university. If not, they were free to take it up with the police outside, or if they were free to go to another organization for help. The idea of the committee was not to limit the choices for the survivors in any way, but to sort of give them a internal redressal mechanism before they need to get engaged with official mechanisms.
Yeah, thank you. I think this sounds like a really inspiring policy that we can all reflect on and perhaps adapt. And something that we've been discussing in the gender safe communities of practice has been how can we also include NGOs, grassroots organizations that represent minoritized communities or that work with them? How can we get their support in these cases to better support the survivor and to make the whole mechanism more robust in terms of responding to the needs of the survivor? And maybe one final question before we open the floor. Of course, one of our mottos in feminist theorizing and politics is that the person is political. And a lot of times, you know, the issues that we choose to engage in reflect also our own personal experiences. And in this case, I don't think there's anyone here who hasn't had a personal experience of gender-based violence in the academic environment. But I would love to hear some of your reflections, both in India and in Ireland. And in Ireland, of course, you have a minoritized status. So what, as a scholar and educator working on TFA, what has been your own experience? And could you talk a bit about the insights and learnings and wisdom and strategies that have come out of your own experience as a scholar, a researcher, and educator?
I often struggle with making visible my upper caste identity, as someone who benefits from the upper caste identity that I have in Indian society, while being minoritized and racialized, and I mean, facing more than one case of racial abuse in Ireland. And when it comes to, say, as you know, Aisha, like I received a death threat a few years ago on Facebook because I was the coordinator of the Ireland India Institute Facebook page, and it was pretty active at that time. And we were quite vocal about issues related to gender-based violence, related to caste, and that attracted a lot of hatred. But I was personally really happy, and this will probably provide a good example of how technology facilitated abuse can be managed in real life. So when I received the death threat, the way my university dealt with it was I was put in touch immediately with the chief security officer in the university. They installed an app in my phone where my location would be visible, and at any point I can ask for help from the campus security. And they provided me with a 24-hour helpline number where I can call campus security and ask them to come and help me in the city of Dublin at any point in time. These helped me feel safe. Uh, and I think when someone is facing technology facilitated abuse, because of the all pervasive nature of technology, because you feel like, oh my god, these people can come to me at any point. How do I feel safe? How do I know I'm not being followed? My phone is not being tracked. These forms of assurance goes a long way in assuring survivors that they will be safe. um I also, I don't know whether this kind of was an answer to your question, but I also feel Ireland is a very fast changing society. in many ways, the kind of migration that happened in the UK in the 60s and 70s, it's happening in Ireland now. And that is why, and we have some of the biggest technology conglomerates working in Ireland, have their offices in Ireland, which makes it like a very good example of how we can deal with TFA, how we can create ideas around dealing with TFA in a way which is replicable elsewhere. And I think the Irish Universities Association has done a really good job of working on consent in terms of this. The Dundalk Institute of Technology has this framework of working on sexual violence, and I love it because they have put it online, and it is a very clear-cut, defined way of who is going to be answerable for which part of the policy framework. And it makes it, I think, a lot of working with technology facilitated abuse, one of the primary things that I've realized is how opaque our strategy mechanisms, frameworks are in universities. So say, for example, if you create a survey today in your institution and ask students, if today something happens to you, technology facilitated abuse, who would you go to? You will see that most often than not, people have no idea, because there is not this clear understanding of connecting TFA with sexual violence or gender-based violence. And as scholars, we often take that as a given, but I think we need to understand that connection, and that connection, that they can go to the frameworks and the already established, the people who are already working on consent, for example, consent officers or EDI officers for technology-based abuse, is something that needs to be promoted actively.
Thank you, Arpita. I think there are a number of really important insights there, having a clear point of reference at the university and incorporating technology facilitated abuse into all of our mechanisms and making sure that everyone knows how they're incorporated. And one thing we haven't talked about is, of course, the experience of guilt in many cases of gender-based violence. And especially with the gender gap, the digital gap that you are talking about based on gender, there can be all kinds of restrictions that especially women put on themselves, feeling embarrassed about their use or ignorance of the technology. What did I do wrong that this happened to me? And so there's a lot that we have to do to create a space of safety, a safe space where we can engage in these conversations and bring ourselves together to build new strategies. And the other, I think, important strategy that comes out of your response with regard to India is the significance of having inter-university mechanisms and conversations. So how can we build, as we're doing in GenderSAFE now, how can each one of us in our own context create those networks where we can learn and continue to learn and continue to inspire one another as we try to develop those mechanisms, and also take it to another level like the Irish Universities Association or the national levels of governance where these mechanisms are set in place. Thank you. There's really a lot to continue to think about. So we are inviting all of you to share comments and conversations in chat, because this is being recorded. I will not be saying out the names, but there's already a question that we can start with. Could the speaker please comment on the non-disclosure clauses used in university policies on disciplinary proceedings and dignity at work, please?
If I do not understand the question, is it in relation to, do you mean in relation to technology facilitated abuse, or do you mean in general, where I am not very clear if
Maybe the person asking the question can clarify?
That would be really helpful.
And in the meantime, if there are other questions or comments, I think Sarah has a question.
Hi, yeah, I do. I have a couple of questions that have come up from our conversations in the communities of practice. First of all, thank you so much for the input and for the generative conversation so far. I think something that's been really important for us is the question on how to move away from individual levels of how to just handle isolated cases and how to make policy recommendations out of that are more generalizable. And in this regard, thank you so much for the supportive material that you've provided with checklists for what victim survivors should know, what they should they pay attention to. But can you talk a little more about what that would mean on a policy level when we think about suggestions and recommendations for universities?
Thanks, Sarah. I think the checklists was also one of the first things that is actually not for the individuals to do, but for the universities to create and share with all their staff and all their students. So when I shared the checklist, I didn't mean for it to be action on an individual level. It was an action to be taken by the university, as one of the initial basic safeguarding processes. But in terms of policy, I think if we look at from my experience of universities in Ireland, cybersecurity measures are very much dedicated right now towards protecting the university from ransomware, protecting the university resources from cyber attack and malware. However, that very mechanism that is already present in universities, and participants here can tell me whether they also have to go through cybersecurity trainings in a monthly basis. I think that is in the case now in most universities. Those cybersecurity trainings, however, are not at all equipping staff or students towards protecting themselves. It is equipping mostly the staff and students towards protecting university interests. And that is the shift in policy that I'm asking for here. That those very mechanisms of cybersecurity trainings, for example, could be used to raise awareness and to create safe spaces for people to talk and share about, say, for example, abusive experiences. What forms of abuse have they experienced? What was the dominant response? To make people aware, for example, if there is a cybersecurity training, and these doesn't have to be like enormous, 2 hour long things. It can be a 10-minute short cybersecurity model on what is technology facilitated abuse, who do you go to in your university if technology facilitated abuse happens to you, who are the people that you talk to if you don't want to go to someone within the university and you want to go somewhere outside the university, what are the national laws that are pertaining to these forms of abuse that might be helpful to you, and access and links to some resources for people, and contact who within the IT team can they contact if something like this happens to them. And at the end, promise them privacy, promise them dignity, and promise them most of all that to make sure that these forms of abuse are not seen as something exceptional. This is something that is happening to people. So this shame and embarrassment related to technology facilitated abuse has to be taken away. A lot of people go through abuse, technology facilitated abuse, for example, scamming, financial control, and people are so ashamed and embarrassed to admit it at workplaces because they think that there would be repercussions on their work status. There will be repercussions of how competent they will be made to seem if they admit to someone having access to their financial resources or someone having access to their student portals. So that aspect those things can be done very easily but are not being done presently.
Great. Thank you so much, Arpita. So back to the questions that are already in the chat. First of all, there's a remark. Congratulations to Arpita on a great presentation. I'm devastated by how behind my institution is in terms of prevention and addressing gender-based harassment and violence in general. That's why we are here, I want to say, to learn from one another and to really push our institutions to address these important issues and to show the better examples of doing so. And Arpita has given us beautiful examples from different contexts on how we can proceed together. So the earlier question is now elaborated. So the question is, when a person has been found to have engaged in professional misconduct through either technology facilitated abuse or sexual violence, and a non-disclosure clause is invoked, so the survivor cannot discuss their experience. So the question is, how would you respond to that situation?
First of all, I'm not a legal scholar and I'm not very clear about the legal expertise, but I would think that in that case, the first thing that the survivor should do is talk to the union representative, talk to the union about who will be a good employment lawyer to hire, talk to the employment lawyer about the non-disclosure. I'm also not sure NDA can be invoked if in cases of where there is a criminal offense. So what needs to be clarified here is also the terms of the NDA. Is the NDA related to forms of TFA? And I'm again, to clarify, I'm not a legal scholar, but as long as my understanding goes, NDAs cannot be implemented when there is a criminal case. So in those cases, the best course of action would be if you are part of a student union or a part of a trade union, as is often the case in Ireland, for example, that staff members are parts of unions. The first place to go is staff union. The second place to go, if you don't have a staff union, is to go to an employment lawyer and seek help.
Thank you, Arpita. And talking about seeking help outside, I'm reflecting on the experience that you shared, your personal experience, which is very valuable. Thank you so much for sharing that. And also some of the other examples that you gave. I'm wondering if we can also think about the relationship between the university and NGOs, grassroots communities that represent different forms of vulnerability. The exchange can take so many different forms, right? I mean, we can invite them into the processes where we develop our mechanisms so that the mechanisms can be more inclusive, more intersectional. We can invite them on a case-by-case basis when a particular abuse happens, but we can also do maybe joint projects where the universities can also support their processes, the kind of process you were trying to lead in your organization, for them to tackle these issues with the support of the university. I wonder if you have any reflections on the different ways in which we can expand our intersectional resources by connecting with the world outside, basically.
I mean, I don't think it is possible without doing that. That is probably one of our primary spaces to go to. And actually, I wanted to share this. I have shared it in the chat, a link of We Protect. We Protect is an alliance, global alliance of organizations who were created to protect children against online abuse, but some of their frameworks and resources are, of course, relevant for young people and relevant for university spaces as well. And absolutely, Aisha, I think the more often in terms of, I was having this discussion yesterday with one of the professors, and we were talking about how when it comes to TFA, there is again a section of the society where the understanding still is that protection from TFA should come from the websites like Meta, organizations who are in charge of the technology. But that simply cannot happen because that is against their mechanisms of profit making. So that will be always conducive to political pressure, that will be always conducive to too many other factors. So protective mechanisms from the platforms themselves has, I think, proved to not work. So yes, alliances between universities and schools and non-governmental organizations to create a continuum of safety network where we understand and grow up using technology in a safe manner is probably from the little that I understand, is probably the way to go.
Thank you. And maybe reflecting more on that, there are organizations outside of universities, feminist organizations that have particularly developed tools for gender-based violence, focusing on technology as well. I'm thinking of Glitch,
Yes.
Chang, maybe using those resources that are already developed outside of the university context and adapting them into the university might be a way to go as well.
Yeah. And there are new, the challenge is also probably to that on the one hand, technology is this universally accessible digital platforms that we can be seen or understood to be accessible everywhere. However, depending on our needs, on where we are geographically based, use of technology is actually quite specific in many forms. So those contextualization of technology in terms of which university is using which forms of technology, which platforms, and hence what kind of safety mechanisms can be attributed is very much dependent on the universities, which is why also we need to understand from all these frameworks, but then implement and create a resource which would be coherent for that specific university space.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. So we need to.
I also see that someone has shared on the chat can'tbuymysilence.com. Yes, that's a very good resource actually
I've shared
for
Glitch.
the NDA related question that we had earlier.
I think Sarah has another question.
Hi, yes, I don't want to take up too much space, but if nobody has a question right now, I would like to platform one that has come out of the general COP discussion directly, where we were talking about the question of evidence and how to make sure that the different forms of gender-based violence can be gathered as evidence. And there, I think we hit our ceiling discussing social media posts as evidence because of the difficulty of proving that somebody's account is indeed connected to the person. And I wanted to ask, since that seems to be something that is quite central for technology facilitated abuse, if you have any guidance in this regard that we could include in our conversations, and perhaps even if you have guidance in terms of risk assessments and how to include this when first deciding if there is a general risk, and second, if there is a specific risk when a report has been triggered. It's a threefold question, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
You mean response from the university, Sarah?
Well, in terms of evidence, yes. How can the university gather evidence and then make sure that the person is truly connected to the account through which technology facilitated gender-based violence is perpetrated?
You will be surprised how often they are not anonymized threats. Just because perpetrators know they can get away, and more often survivors themselves know the identity of the perpetrators. But if we take a survivor-led approach, perhaps what's important is not so much the identity of the perpetrator, but how the perpetration is happening. So what form of protection the survivor need. So in terms of evidence gathering, I will answer your third question first. In terms of evidence gathering, the primary approach that is suggested is before a university, say for example, we are talking about a university where presently there is no framework or resource present in terms of technology facilitated abuse. Before creating or conducting any such framework, what needs to be done is conducting an assessment, a survey, or where all the participants from all different segments of the university takes part to understand what forms of abuse are common in that university space. So in terms of evidence gathering, it is not so much the particulars of which person it is that is conducting the abuse, but what are the forms of abuse that are being experienced the most, and what are the kinds of redressal mechanisms that are needed. What are what do the survivors from that context need? In terms of particular cases, then, say a survivor comes forward and reports a form of technology facilitated abuse. The evidence that they provide is the form of evidence that needs to be collected, of course, with their consent, that needs to be kept during the duration of the redressal, during which the redressal mechanism takes place. And again, coming back to cash and how cash was formed, was while the case was going on, the identity of the survivor as well as the perpetrator were both protected till the whole mechanism was dealt with. And then it was up to the survivor whether they wanted to disclose their identity or not. The survivor was able to disclose the details of the case and the identity according to their discretion. And I think in terms of technology facilitated abuse, there can be cases where the perpetrator is unknown and where we have evidence of crime, for example, say a financial scam, someone whose, say, corporate credit card has been hacked, money taken, and that is being reported by a university staff. Now, that might be, they might suspect that that is part of a larger coercive control or abuse that they are facing from their partners who got their hands on their credit card for some reason. And they might disclose that. But there are legal implications of whether the university can use that information um, in order to make legal proceedings, right? So that is the point where it ceases to be an inter-university matter and you have to seek help of lawyers and police mechanisms. So this is just an example to say that it is very much a case-by-case basis, but that's why there are so many different forms of cases that's why a specific framework to address technology-based abuse is needed.
I think Sarah had a follow-up question there. What specific questions would you include in a survey like this?
There are examples of survey that I can share later. There are examples of what a technology facilitated abuse. Again, going back to Australia, there were some of the first mechanisms of or information gathering happened in Australian universities. Monash was a very good place where a lot of this research happened. Nicola Henry, one of the professors there, did some work as far back as 2018 when we were just like starting to talk about the use of technologies. And yeah, if you look up those places, you will find like examples of the survey questions. But it usually, just to give you broad strokes, they would ask questions like, have you ever felt threatened in your while in online spaces? Which are the forms of platform that you most commonly use? Have you ever felt threatened? Can you give us details? And that's an open-ended question where people can choose to just give the details of what exactly happened, or they can avoid. Then people can be asked like, while you were in the university, have you ever experienced TFA within university? What did you do in that form of mechanism? Was it clear to you who to go to talk were clear instructions provided to you in order to make sure this thing doesn't happen again? Was the IT team helpful? These are the kind of questions that often come up in surveys like that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Arpita. These are really great ways forward for all of us. And we also included some links in the chat, some of the organizations that we had named, including a webinar we had organized in a sister project, which would be a sister conversation to this one, called Creating Safe Digital Spaces from an Intersectional Gender Perspective. That was Riztira's webinar that brought together speakers from Glitch, Chain, and Stop Fisha, based in France. I think a good reminder here is that something that Arpita is reminding us, and these other examples are reminding us, we are not alone. There's already incredible feminist knowledge and wisdom and work out there, both inside universities as well as in unions and university associations. In some cases, national legislation. Australia seems to be a really good case to follow up on, and outside examples of NGOs and transnational organizations that are investing a lot of thought and effort and creativity into creating safe digital spaces for us all. And there's a lot that we can learn from them, inviting them into our conversations and shaping our policies accordingly. You have given us so many tools and new ideas and strategies today, Arpita. Really, it's been incredibly rich. So we are coming to the end. So if there are last minute questions or comments that anyone would like to share, I see that there's a comment that says, this was so informative and enjoyable. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. So thank you. I will echo that.
Thank you for coming, Moya.
And there's another resource that has been shared, 3 Years of Coco's Law, Impact and Analysis of Harassment and Harmful Communications Act from 2020. For practical guidance on how to include TVSF in policy, this may be a helpful resource, someone says. It's a chapter on technology-facilitated sexual violence and technology-based solutions, learning after COVID. Wonderful, thank you. These are very helpful resources, each one showing us that we have a lot of resources to draw on as we tackle with these really challenging questions of how to address gender-based violence, technology facilitated or otherwise in our institutions, and create genuinely safe spaces for all. Anything else? Any final comments from anyone? Then I will turn to Arpita. What would you like to say as your final words, and then we'll close.
I want to thank everyone for coming here, and thanks to Sarah and Marina for organizing this. Thank you for being such a good commentator, Aisha, as always. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope this was helpful. And I just want to say you can find me online easily if you have any follow-up questions or if you want to get together, talk more about this. I'm always happy to chat.
Thank you so much, Arpita, for very generously offering your experience, your expertise, your wisdom with us today. It was really a very rich conversation that I'm sure will reflect in our work in GenderSAFE at many different layers. And I also want to thank Sarah and Marina and Vasya, Lut, everyone who has contributed to these incredibly insightful webinars, conversations that we've been having within GenderSAFE and outside. And today was incredibly rich. So thank you all for being here, and best wishes for everyone in the incredibly important work that you're doing in your own context, your own institutions. We are not alone.